Okay. Good evening, everybody. You're not going to hear the microphone, by the way. It's not amplifying in the room. This is actually for our recording and people watching at home. So it's a little confusing for me to be holding a mic and then not hearing me over the loudspeaker, but bear with me. Also, for the Q&A, we're going to take this same approach. So I will be handing the microphone around for Q&A. For those who don't know me, I'm Ned Spang. I'm the director of the Robert Mondavi Institute and associate professor of food science and technology here at UC Davis. I welcome you all here. Very excited to have you. This is a great turnout. And of course, we're all very excited to hear from Karen in a bit. Karen, it's lovely to have you here. I have your book at home, and it's an incredible reference every time I open a bottle of wine to put it into some context of where it comes from, why I should be interested in that region. It's some great armchair travel, so I really appreciate that. We're here, of course, for the Walt Klenz Lecture. A little bit of background is that the Walt Klenz Lectureship was established in 2005 through a pledge originally made by Beringer Blass Wine Estates to honor CEO Walt Klenz upon his retirement. The endowment supports a biannual lecture hosted by the Robert Mondavi Institute and sponsored by Treasury Wine Estates. The series brings world-famous winemakers and wine industry professionals to the UC Davis student body and the community to share their unique perspectives, insights, and experiences in wine business. The goal is to help educate our budding winemakers and the public about the important issues that the wine industry faces after the wine is made. Now, Walt Klenz began his California wine industry career in 1973. In 1976, he was named Director of Marketing at Beringer Vineyards. Mr. Klenz held a number of senior marketing, financial, and operations positions at Beringer until his appointment in 1990 as president. After Beringer was sold to Foster's Group in 2000, he headed Foster's global wine business. Klenz served on the advisory board of ASC Fine Wines from 2008 to 2010 and also serves on the board of directors of J-Lore Winery and Columbia Sportswear Company. He is a past president of Napa Valley Vintners and past chairman of the Wine Institute. I am so pleased to welcome Walt back to campus and to introduce our guest for this evening, Karen MacNeil.
Thank you. It is sort of funny to hold us up here. Can people hear me? Well, welcome. Let me add my welcome. What a wonderful turnout. And I'm sure we're going to really have a really interesting hour and a half with Karen this evening. Ned, thank you very much for your comments. And a very tardy welcome to the Robert Mondavi Institute. I know you were appointed last summer, but it's my first time to formally welcome you, and really look forward to working with you. Before I get to Karen, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to. There's a gentleman in the back of the room here that I'd like to recognize. Dr. Andrew Waterhouse, Andy, as he's known to everyone in the. I think as stand up, yeah. As many of you know, Andy, the long career at the Department of Viticulture and Enology and Viticulture, and for the last 5+ years was the director of the Robert Mondavi Institute here, and I just wanted to first of all congratulate you on your incredible career here at Davis, and thank you so much for how much help you gave me and all of us and your staff for this lecture series over the last 5 years. You elevated it way up from where it was, and I look forward to seeing you in the back of the room in an unofficial capacity. But Andy, thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you for all the time you've spent working with us in the lecture series. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, or the evening speaker, Karen MacNeil. Karen has done so many things in the wine industry over a fairly long period of time that I want to keep this short. So rather than go through a long litany of her accomplishments, I'm going to mention a couple of things that, in fact, that a number of you have had a chance to touch and feel here this evening already. Number one, the wine Bible. The Wine Bible was first published over 20 years ago, and I think, as some of you know, has just released its third edition. it's an extraordinary book, I must say. It's 700 pages, chock full of information and content, but also importantly written in a very, very approachable and entertaining style that makes it a wonderful read. I bought my copy, the third edition in Napa over the holidays, over the Christmas holidays, and I've had an opportunity to read it quite a bit over the spring, and it's really congratulations on doing that. The only other project I want to mention is a more recent initiative, essentially a digital newsletter called WineSpeed that Karen created, and I believe is still editing to this day, where this newsletter offers consumers insights into the world of wine and also suggestions on exploring through the thousands and thousands of bottles of wine that are available to buy in the marketplace. It's the digital world is here to stay, and the wine industry may have been a little late getting into it, but I think the wine industry is pretty involved in the digital communication efforts right now. So, which leads me to the last, before I turn it over to Karen, leads me to the last that I think is important, is to recognize the awards that she's received in her career. And I think the awards she's received are unprecedented and probably are not matched by any other wine communications professional. Number one, the James Beard Award for wine and spirits Communicator of the Year, the Louis Roeder Award for outstanding wine writing, consumer wine writing, and the International Wine and Spirits Award for global wine communications. I don't think anyone has equal or greater a series of awards than Karen does, and I think it reflects what the many things she's done to help grow this industry over the last decades. So, that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Karen MacNeil. You don't need this, right? Oops, I'm sorry. You got a real one.
I was worried this wasn't going to come back down. I was quickly trying to think of, I do know one wine joke, only one wine joke, and I was hoping that I didn't have to tell it. Maybe at the end I will. Thank you, Walt. Thank you, Ned. Audrey, I know, is here somewhere, and Babette, thank you as well. It's really a pleasure to be here. And so we're going to range around for about 40 minutes, kind of broadly in the world of wine writing. And then I'm going to leave a good amount of time for comments and questions from you, because I want to hear what you think as well. So I want to start out, let me find this clicker. I want to start out with a few questions. Does anyone know the #1 best-selling wine introduced last year? Oh, is this clicker not working? That's the opening slide. Are we ready? Can I go? Here it is, the #1 Stella Rosa pineapple and chili wine. Does anyone know the number of the volume of RTDs now being sold? RTDs, right? Ready to drink cocktails? 3.6 million cases. That's larger than the total volume of wine sold in the United States. And the word RTD probably didn't even exist for most of us a few years ago. The leading RTD in the country Gallo's High Noon was only invented in 2019. It alone already sells 21 million cases. Does anyone know the average percentage of legal drinking age adults who say they are cutting back on wine? Oh, not the world. 64%. And if you look at just the Gen Z cohort, that rises to 75%. Does everyone know the number of glasses of wine that a day that the World Health Organization believes you should have? 0. A doctor for the WHO, whose title is European Regional Advisor for Alcohol and Illicit Drugs, Dr. Carina Ferreira Borges, is quoted in her report last year saying, "The risk to your health starts with a single drop of wine." Do you know the percentage of people aged 21 to 39 who participated in dry January or who plan to participate in sober October? 64%, according to a wine opinions survey. If you combined dry January and sober October, that is 17% of the calendar year when a huge swath of Americans plan not to drink any wine or any beverage with alcohol in it. And yet, the wine industry, including many of the last remaining wine journalists, are, for the most part, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The last remaining wine journalists is a heavy thought. And my heart is heavy even saying that phrase. But wine writing as we have known it is disappearing. Do you know how many newspapers in America have a journalist on staff who covers wine? 2. There used to be hundreds. At the same time that wine writing is vanishing, wine consumption around the world is declining, and wine drinking is becoming denormalized. In Bordeaux, it's declining so precipitously that just weeks ago, 23,000 acres of Bordeaux vines were deemed to be grubbed up very shortly. In fact, the only region in France, the only region that is not suffering steep declines in sales of its wine is Burgundy. France, the mother ship, right? The place where the concept of terroir was born and where it first became the critical core and heartbeat of viticulture. As it turns out, France cannot sell a lot of its wine, not even to the French themselves. So, is there a causal relationship between falling consumption worldwide and diminishing wine journalism? Or is that a sort of coincidental correlation? I don't know the answer to that. But I do know something about the evolution of wine writing in the United States and why wine writing is important. Let me start by defining what wine writing is and is not. First of all, wine writing is not wine criticism. Wine criticism, as a form of writing that included specific evaluations and scores, began in the late 1970s with Robert Parker Jr. and the Wine Advocate. You know, wine had somehow managed to be sold for 8,000 years before critics arrived on the scene, but from about 1980 to 2010 or so, those 30 years, critics had enormous sway and power. No matter that a critic's tasting notes were often abbreviated stream of conscious snippets, most of which use the same 20 words over and over again. And no matter how inscrutable or boring those tasting notes were, many wine drinkers came to think of wine criticism a little bit like Consumer Reports. It promised to get you to the right purchase fast. And critics themselves were and are fast. They sat in their offices and tasted 50 to 100 wines a day without wasting time, as they would say, walking through vineyards or going to wineries or talking one-on-one with winemakers, viticulturalists, or vintners. As a young journalist, I had my own experience with this. The very first time I met Bob Parker, who, by the way, I like very much, we had been invited to taste German Rieslings from one of the best importers of German wines in the United States. So we were in a hotel room, like a banquet hotel room. Let me clarify that. Bob Parker and I were in a hotel room. Yes, we were. Okay. No photo of that, though. Anyway, there were all these long tables lined up and 125 bottles of Riesling down the center. On either side of the bottles were a single glass. Bob stood on one side, I stood on the other. The importer introduced us. Bob and I shook hands, and the importer left. Bob was done with 125 Rieslings when I was on wine 24. So Bob Parker is clearly a brilliant taster, and he is very fast, and maybe I am too slow. But I knew when I looked up and he was 100 wines ahead of me, I knew that I was not a critic, that I was a writer. And for a wine writer, what matters most are people and place. People and place are the bookends, and the rich core between them is a wine story. And a wine story can only exist in the context of a culture. For a writer like me, the ratio of sheep to winemakers in New Zealand is exactly that kind of crazy little gem that a writer loves because it helps tell the story of a place. And just in case you're wondering, actually the ratio is 5-1, sheep to winemakers. Not quite this many, but I couldn't resist that photo. A wine writer is the kind of person who finds an old bar in the Veneto so they can eat whatever's traditional while they're drinking Amarone. That traditional dish with Amarone is horse meat. And there are, in fact, special butcher shops in the Veneto because horse meat cannot be sold legally in the same shop as meat that is beef or chicken. A wine writer is the kind of person who drinks Greek wine, Greek mountain wine, out of hairy bags made from goat stomachs, and smokes cigars and drinks Rioja with bullfighters and interviews men after the fight who line up to buy the tail and testicles of a bullfighting bull said to imbue the eater with the bull's strength and virility and courage. Yeah, he was the guy. I liked him. No, never. A wine writer is the kind of person who would waltz between the wine barrels with winemakers in Vienna and learn to tango in Argentina in hopes that it would shed some light on the sensuality of Malbec. A wine writer would stomp grapes at 2 a.m. in ancient Portuguese lagars until their legs were neon purple and stayed that way for weeks afterwards. And of course, a wine writer would work harvesting grapes all night long for weeks with a Mexican crew. I've done all those things, hoping that each of them would bring me more vividly to the life of wine and that I could write about it more compellingly. And I think that has largely been true. But apart from books and blogs, which we'll get to in a minute, the publications where you can write about stories like that are virtually non-existent now. And even if you find them, the pay and the competition are brutal. First of all, because of the dwindling number of outlets, scores of writers are now willing to work for free. Last fall, Newsweek called me and asked if I would do a piece on rosé champagnes. So we plotted out the content. I'm talking with the head editor. We plotted out the content, the visuals, the word length. And at the end, I said, by the way, what does Newsweek pay for a piece like this? The editor paused for the briefest second, and somewhat surprised, I think she was, by the question. And then she said, nothing. We don't pay anything to writers. A publication that still does pay is Decanter magazine, the English publication. And the last big piece I did for Decanter was on the history of Cabernet Franc in California, which is, by the way, the most expensive grape in California. Many people think that's Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's Cabernet Franc. So this meant researching the history of Cabernet Franc in California, and my staff and I acquired the 60 top Cabernet Francs in the whole state and tasted them blind over a series of 5 days to write about what we thought were the 20 best. All in all, about 2 weeks of work. Decanter's fee, $500. 2 weeks of work. In the 1980s, 30 years ago, the New York Times paid me 2 times. Hello, where are you? They paid nothing either, no. All right, let's see. 2 times, there we go. That 30 years ago, 2 times that for a freelance piece. Good Housekeeping, Mirabella, Elle, all the women's magazines paid 3 times that 30 years ago. And the best magazine of all to write wine for was Playboy, who 30 years ago paid 8 times what the leading wine magazine pays today. No, it's depressing. The dwindling number of print publications has resulted, of course, in an explosion of digital wine blogs. There are now about 1,300 of these, according to the Wine Media Conference, although that number includes Canada and Mexico as well. I think I should have done this differently. So clearly there's a lot of pent-up need for writers to write. Of course, a blog means you definitely are not going to be paid, except for maybe a few dollars in affiliate fees or ads. which only the very best blogs get, and that's probably, the number of those are probably under 5. But blogs present their own problems. The vast majority of them are non-professional, and almost all of them have no editor. Editors make writers better writers. You can't get past a good editor without checking your facts. I'll give you an example from the first edition of the Wine Bible. For that first edition, my line editor was a woman named Barbara. It's hard to tell how old Barbara was. I pegged her at about 50. She was shy, single, spoke with a slight stutter when she spoke at all, which wasn't very often, and she lived with a ton of cats in Greenwich Village. I'm not kidding, she had a ton of cats. None of this particularly surprised me, but what did surprise me were the high heels. Because Barbara, who had her hair pulled back into a tight gray bun, would teeter into Workman Publishing, balancing on a different pair of stiletto heels each time we had a meeting. And I mean, these stilettos could have rivaled Imelda Marcos. My publisher, Workman, had hired Barbara specifically to edit the Wine Bible because it was a big manuscript, a huge manuscript. And edit for her, and in fact, for any really good book, edit meant line by line, word by word. Nothing, and I mean nothing, got by Barbara. Her weapon was a red felt tip pen, and the margins of my manuscript were soon bleeding with her accusatory questions. How did I know X? Where was my evidence for Y? I remember getting back the Burgundy chapter, and in trying to sort of illuminate, the glory of the Catholic Church under the monks and the hegemony of the Church, I had written the sentence, in fact, the stunning Burgundian Abbey of Cluny was the most famous cathedral in Europe until St. Peter's in Rome was built to surpass it. And there in the margin, in glaring red letters, Barbara had written, until St. Peter's in Rome was built to surpass it, or until St. Peter's in Rome was built and surpassed it. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. That could make you cry, that preposition right there. It could take days to find out. Was it to surpass it or and surpassed it? So I understand writers needing to write. But when blogs started appearing, I have to say, part of me was stunned because people made up facts. Or they channeled Kellyanne Conway, right? And just put down alternative facts. I was so worried and despondent about this that a few years ago, I did create, as Walt was saying, my own digital newsletter called WineSpeed, which is fast and fun. There's a little card in front of you about it. It's fascinating. It's more than a blog. It's a whole digital newsletter that comes to your inbox every Friday. But it brings, I hope, Wine Bible level fact-checking to the blog form. And believe me, when I get something wrong, I hear about it. I've had more than one email from a scientist at Davis. I have Carol Meredith on speed dial, let me tell you, anytime I write about anything that has to do with wine genetics. I believe that above all, wine writing has a duty to communicate wine's beauty, awe, and wonder. Here we go. I believe winemakers have a duty to communicate wine's beauty, awe, and wonder. I wonder if here at UC Davis, students are even taught about that. Recently, in the Napa Valley, at a 3-day event called Premier Napa Valley, I interviewed 5 winemakers on video. With the video camera rolling, I asked all of them just one question without the others around, just one question. And that question was, why is wine important? Why is wine important? You can see in the video that each of them was taken aback for a minute. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. If I had asked them about maceration times for Cabernet Sauvignon, or if these days they were using misters in the vineyard and shade cloth, they would have had an immediate response. But why wine is important, arguably the most important question of all, stopped them. Do winemakers have a responsibility to be able to talk about wine beyond just what's written on a tech sheet? Do schools and universities have a responsibility to talk about and teach the historical, cultural, philosophic, and emotional roles that wine has played over centuries? I really am never going to staple a speech again. To talk about and examine why wine is important, one thing is true. Writers cannot write moving stories, cannot emotionally touch readers unless winemakers and viticulturalists have something moving to say. And any winemaker who thinks that that's the role of the marketing department has abdicated his or her power. Why wine is important is not a marketing question. It's a question that relates to the very existence of our profession. I'm reminded of the single best quote a winemaker ever said to me. I asked him, he was a Pinot Noir winemaker, and I asked him what he looked for in making great Pinot Noir. He said, a great Pinot Noir should make you feel as if Grace Kelly just walked into the room. And later, he could tell me about oak and punch downs and clonal types and all those things that I wanted to know that he could tell me later. But I never forgot Grace Kelly. The neuroanatomist Jill Bolt Taylor has said, we think of ourselves as thinking creatures who feel, but really we're actually feeling creatures who think. In addition to wine writers, wine critics, and wine bloggers, there are now a fast-growing number of new sort of what I would call quasi-communicators from whom the American public gets a lot of their wine information now, and that's wine influencers. There's no statistic on the number of wine influencers currently at work in the US, but we do know this, and this is shocking. According to the Bureau for Labor Statistics, the average salary for a wine influencer is more than the median base salary for a Napa Valley winemaker. As of 2022, wine influencers earned about $73,000 annually, and the base salary for a Napa Valley winemaker was $1,000 less than that. Someone in a winery tech lab, by the way, earned $23,000 less than an influencer. If you're a student, I hope I'm not discouraging you from graduating. You still want to graduate. It's still fabulous to be in the wine business. I'm not kidding. So despite this perilous downward spiral in wine writing, influencers are probably here to stay. Recently, the New York Times reported that according to Goldman Sachs, brands in the US, this is all brands, not just wine brands, but brands in the US spend already right now, today, more than $5 billion a year on influencers. For any of you who have children, here's a thoughtful idea. Nearly 1/3 of preteens list influencing as their career goal. 11% of Gen Z, born between 1997 and 2012, describe themselves as influencers. The wine writing that is hanging on now faces another threat. I think I have to go by 5 billion. And this threat may even further hasten its demise: AI. Generative AI can already write any basic wine piece. It gets the facts more or less correct, kind of like any good WSET student. It mirrors them right back. And if AI becomes the dominant form of wine writing, wine communications will truly become an elliptical feedback loop of innocuous information that means nothing to anyone. A feedback loop so devoid of creativity, so lacking in thinking, that wine itself may lose its meaning. Wine, so rich, so soulful, so capable of stirring passion, will become just another beverage. And just like that, 8,000 years of beauty, awe, and wonder will slip away. I know you won't believe this, but I'm actually a happy person. I'm kind of a glass half full person. You know, I believe in wine. I believe in its ability to bring people together. I believe that it is a good and true thing, that it is the silent music of nature. When I wrote the first wine Bible, the first edition, which took 8 unpaid years, my publisher told me that they were going to print 1,000 copies. I said, don't do it. I only have 25 friends who are going to buy the book, right? But Peter Workman of Workman Publishing told me that, that the most successful a wine book could ever be was about 8,000 copies. It seemed like a huge number to me. The Wine Bible has now sold 1 million copies. Thank you. So I have to be optimistic. Optimistic that the stories of people and places are inherently gravitational stories, and that why wine matters, why wine is important, is a question that should continue to be asked and continue to be written about. Thank you. And now I want to take your comments, your questions, because we certainly have time to do that. Yes, madam.
So I sell wine for a living. I have also done some wine writing, and I know that as we try to appeal to a younger audience, they want more experience. And the way I learned to wine about winemakers and where it came from is less important. So when you're doing your wine writing, are you finding anything in particular where the way you tell a story is resonating more with younger wine enthusiasts?
This lady said that she sells wine, and when she is selling wine, especially to younger people, they may not want to hear about how the wine was made. She's wondering if there's anything that, resonates more with younger people. You know, I'll say that when I started out, most of the great wine books were written by British men. And we know who they all are. And not all of them, but most of them were like deathly reading. Just gray page after gray page after gray page of often of accurate wine facts. But they were written, and almost all of these men, by the way, either went to Oxford or Cambridge. So there was a way of writing that was very much taught at those universities. And most of those books they didn't have sheep in them, that's for sure. And they had, in a sense, culture and art and history and food stripped out of them. They were just about wine. And so what I have found, and it's not so much that this appeals to younger audiences, I think it appeals to everyone, is first to not write your writing, to talk your writing. The single comment I hear over and over again about the Wine Bible, and we have 1,000 letters from people saying, I feel like you're sitting there just telling me the story. And that's just good writing of any type. Good writing of any type talks the writing. It doesn't write the writing. With WineSpeed, anyone in my office can tell you the thing I am always saying is, you've got to change this sentence. If you were standing on the street of St. Helena, you would never say this sentence to a friend. This is writing the writing. Don't write the writing, talk the writing. Write in a way that you would just talk with a normal person. So I think that kind of communication in writing is critically important. And then I guess, I'm endlessly fascinated by the littlest things about wine. I mean, every now and then, I don't know, I suppose if I wear a hat or something, I love to like stand in a retail store and I'll see someone, examining a wine, thinking, should I buy it or not? And I'll go up to them and say, can I tell you about that wine? People are like, who are you? I say, I'm the person who probably knows the most about wine in this store, to which they assume that I work for the store. Just another person buying wine, but I will try and tell them some little fascinating thing that I know for a fact. In television, we call this an ignot, and I didn't know that. And if you can tell someone, and I didn't know that they want to go home and say to their partner, you won't believe this, do you know that there are 5 sheep for every winemaker in New Zealand? Those are the funniest little things that then let you tell the bigger, important cultural story. But you have to start with something fascinating. More comments, questions? Ben.
So thank you for your talk. It was great. So as a faculty member at UC Davis here, I can tell you to one of your questions, we do try to teach the beauty and awe of the system. From my point of view, it's the beauty and awe of microbiology. For Andy Waterhouse, who has pointed out, maybe it's the chemistry and the phenolics, whatever it is. So we do try to impart that. So my question more goes to other things that I see out there, which include young people's kind of draw and passion when it comes to things like going back to Kodak film, going to records, vinyl again, coffee. I don't know how many things show up on my Instagram where people are investing this huge amount of energy into how to pull the best espresso shot. Why do you think that's not translating to wine? That passion that you see in, because what I see is craft. Young people are interested in craft. So why isn't it translating to wine where craft is, this thing, right?
Such a good comment. Ben was saying, if you think about, and again, I think it's not just young people, but a lot of people who are like, they want to know the best craft beers, right? Craft bourbons, the best coffees. Think about what a coffee shops in New York, where I spent most of my adult life. Coffee was 35 cents in the Greek deli, and you didn't have 27 types of coffee like a Starbucks menu or a Pete's menu. So why hasn't that translated? He said, I think it's because the wine industry tells its story terribly, if it tells it at all. And I mean, you would not believe how I sometimes now get really abrupt with winemakers. When I ask them, they'll be like starting to tell me things that I could just look up on their website. I'm like, I'll just look that up. Tell me something to hang on to. Tell me something about your passion. Tell me something about why you were so moved to make this wine. Tell me about the craft. Tell me how much you use your intuition versus science and how those two things, it's kind of like, wine is like medicine in that regard. You have to have both science and intuition. But don't just tell me the things that first of all, do not tell me you want to make the best wine possible. I'll shoot myself. I know you want to make the best wine possible. You and 100,000 other winemakers have already told me that. Don't start there. Tell me something you feel. Tell me something that motivates you. And I think in an effort to be, I don't know if it's an effort to be either non-judgmental or just state the facts of what is, but so many winemakers just recite the recipe of what they did. I let the wine cold soak for a number of days, and then we put it in cement, and then 30% of it went in French oak, 70% new. I mean, the recipe of wine, knowing full well that I'm never going to write the recipe. That's not the story I'm going to write about you. And nobody is going to care. Nobody knows what that means anyway. Your wine was 70% new oak and somebody else's was 66% oak. And what? Does that make us want to buy it or not? I mean, the more nerdy we are, the more those things, I shouldn't say they don't matter, because I will think, oh, wow, that's fascinating. This wine is so beautiful. It doesn't even show any evidence of oak in its flavor, and yet it's 70% new oak. That's really interesting, but I wouldn't ever write it. And my staff will tell you, every time we do tastings, we taste about 2,500 wines a year in our office, about 3 times a week. And there is not a single time that I don't grumble looking at the back label. I swear I'm going to go into business writing back labels. These people need help. Like, this is so awful, badly written, and it's the recipe of the wine. It's not what galvanizes someone to want to have an experience. And I think people feel like the wine industry is somewhat out of touch. in that regard. You know, if you talk to a person who makes artisanal bourbons, even if you're not a spirits drinker, you're like, wow, I want to taste that. I mean, it sounds like so cool and experiential. They don't give you the recipe for the bourbon. They make you want to experience it. Andy? I'm always terrified when a scientist has a question, but all right.
So how many barrels? No, I'm not going to ask that. So one sector of the industry that's growing is natural wine. And based on your comments, it seems to me that perhaps one of the reasons is that they are telling a very good story about their passion and not about how they make it. I mean, I think my take on it is that the wines are different. They have, which in many cases we would call classic flaws, but the customers don't care. In fact, they celebrate that. And so I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about natural wine?
I think, so Andy just said such a brilliant comment that one of the areas that we do see a bit of growth in, or actually a great degree of growth, is in so-called natural wines. And that maybe that's because there's a palpable passion behind those wines. When the phenomenon of natural wines first started to get some traction, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was perplexed. I was like, what? This is like microbial stew. Are they kidding? This is like, going crazy. This is bad wine. But I have watched that, and to be clear, not all of them, of course. But I've watched that phenomenon, as many of you have, and I agree. It's because you can feel the motivation of those people. You can feel what they believe in, the principle behind what they've done, or in many cases, not done. No one's just neutral about it. No one says, you know, I don't know, here, taste my whatever. They're like, I can't wait for you to taste my pet nat. God, who even knew what pet nat meant, 8 years ago? Not many people. You know.
We had Martha Suman give the talk.
Yeah.
About a year ago. What, Andy, was it a year and a half ago? Martha Suman? Yeah.
So.
Passion.
So I agree that that I think what is driving that movement, which by the way, natural wine has no definition. And in the US, it does now have a definition in France, but it has no definition in the US. But it has, if you ask anyone in New York, what's the hippest place to go to get a glass of wine before you go out to dinner? It's a natural wine bar. And there are scores of them, especially on the East Coast. In Napa Valley, where I now live, there are no natural wine bars. However, I believe that a lot of winemakers would define their wine, actually, as essentially natural wine. Certainly people who are trying very hard to work biodynamically or with regenerative viticulture have also an almost moral and ethical feeling to be very careful about what they do and don't do. But I couldn't agree with you more. It's emotion and passion driving that movement. Other comments, questions, sir?
Well, building on that, I think the wine industry has put wine on a pedestal, and I think that is what puts off the younger generation.
This gentleman said that sometimes the wine industry puts wine on a pedestal, and that could be off-putting. I agree with that. I think that is getting better. I remember this was a number of years ago, And I was in New York at a restaurant that won't be named, but a very expensive, fabulous restaurant. And I'm there with a friend of mine who is a woman who runs a cooking school, one of the top cooking schools in New York. So the restaurant is, this is probably 20 years ago, so there are captains, front waiters, back waiters, very elegant restaurant. And my friend Arlene says, I'm going to look at the menu. I'll figure out what we're ordering. You choose the wine. So I'm looking at this, beautiful, big wine list. And she and I are talking. I order a white Burgundy, and we're still talking. And all of a sudden, I feel this presence sort of slightly behind me. And patiently waiting, but I stop talking mid-sentence, and the sommelier leans down so that only I can hear, and says in my ear in a very low tone, "Madam, I regret to inform you that you have made an unwise choice." I should have been calmer about this. But I jumped up out of my chair, got really close to him, like really close, and said, "And I regret to inform you that you have just violated one of the cardinal rules of hospitality. And now, bring me my wine." Sat back down. I mean, I'm never that way. I'm usually a cupcake of a person, but I was so angry. I was just shaking. That kind of stuff happened a lot 20 years ago and before. So I don't think something like that would happen today. And so I think we're getting better. But the ivory white tower idea of wine, maybe a little bit, but I think that is getting better. I really do. The number of, among other things, the number of relatively young sommeliers is helping that. They're like, "Oh, let's just enjoy something here. What can I turn you on to?" Who did I see? Sir.
You gave kind of a dismal picture of corporate wine making. And to remind you, because I don't think it's quite as grim as you make it out, Starbucks 40 years ago was a coffee shop on Finney Ridge in Seattle. Howard Schultz came in and said, "This has got marketable commodity, the ambiance and stuff like that. The rest is history." But if you look at it, there are more cups of coffee being consumed today probably than ever in the history of the United States. They all have a lot of foo-foo in them, but and I sort of wonder if corporate winemaking won't increase the demand, and with that increased demand, hopefully will spill over to increased appreciation, which is what you're talking about. You want to appreciate the wine, not just drink it, and that's I don't think corporate America can do that. So.
Yes, well, this gentleman was making a distinction about corporate America and whether or not they have a role to play in increasing demand, in part because, you didn't say this, but in part because they have the power and the money and the distribution to do that. I think there are two wine businesses. There's beverage wine and there's fine wine. And they can both be excellent, and they can both be not very good, actually. I have nothing against corporate wine. In fact, one of the things in WineSpeed that we have, one of our little areas, is called steals. These are wines that cost less than $5 a glass, so less than $25 a bottle. And often those are made by corporations, and they can be like, wow, I can't believe you can buy this wine for the equivalent of $4 a glass. That is absolutely great. I have a complete respect for that. What I don't know, and what we all probably hope, is that well-made, inexpensive wine, often by corporations, but not exclusively, that will propel people over their lifetime to finer and finer and finer wines, and finer and finer and finer appreciation. That's probably what happened to us, the boomers. I don't know about you, but I didn't go on a date unless there was Lancers and Mateus. I mean, so occasionally Strawberry Hill, but so I mean, boomers know that trajectory. I'm not sure that's going to be the trajectory of a 22-year-old today, though, because the other thing is that at that time, you remember the late 60s, early 70s, inexpensive wine and wine in general was like bohemian chic, you know? Remember Chianti bottles and the candle and all of that? It was you were adopting a European like way of being. It was sophisticated even to drink it, you know, Chianti, inexpensive Chianti. I think people who are 22 today have a world that in some cases don't have a wine world that is lacking any sense of romance to it. Even Lancers and Mateus had romance to them. And I couldn't even name a wine today that I think plays on that idea of experience, communalness, romance. These were real motivating factors in the 60s and 70s, really right up until the 80s. This lady back here, I think.
We have time for one more. Two more.
Do I get to drink wine now? I guess I do.
Karen, I'd like to get back to writing for a second. As somebody from the library world, I share your concern about the lack of, interest in writing today. But you also talked about influencers, and Psalms are a kind of influencer. And I'm thinking about the transition from silence to talkies. And what are you doing, and your colleagues, to meet consumers where they are now, which is on TikTok? How can we tell these stories in a different way that's still using words, but maybe in a medium that people really resonate with now?
Yeah, such a good question. Yes, I will repeat it. The comment, which is such a good comment, is, you have to meet people halfway, and there are all these other mediums. TikTok, for example. What are wine writers, people like me, doing to kind of to do that, to use new mediums, to begin to touch readers in forms of media that they are comfortable in? I have been trying to get on TikTok for a while. For some reason, TikTok has banned me, but that's all right, we're banning them back. But what we do is we do a tremendous amount now of video. And we almost never go anywhere, do anything without doing a 2-minute video on it. I have a following on Instagram and Facebook and WineSpeed and Substack of about maybe 140,000. That's not huge, but it's not bad for a wine person who is often considered one of the oldest women in wine, I guess. So there is that. We do a lot of video, and we are on every social media platform except for TikTok. And WineSpeed was a response to that. WineSpeed was okay, let's do fast, fun, fascinating, but fact-checked. And I believe in that. I believe that it makes you a better writer when you have to write short, when you have to appear on camera. Luckily for me, I mean, COVID, for example, was, of course, changed all of our worlds in all of our various individual ways. For us, I went overnight from kind of writing almost everything that I did to doing hundreds of videos. I had started out in radio and talk radio and a little bit of television, and I'm like, okay, dust off those skills. We bought a teleprompter, we bought an extremely good camera, we have lighting, we have a whole studio now, and we try and do as much visual communicating as we can. I don't know that I can say that all wine writers are doing that. I know a lot of wine writers who just are not comfortable in front of a camera, and it is a different. You can't be afraid of your audience. You can't be afraid of the camera, and so that's hard for a lot of people. Yeah.
So first, thank you for speaking with us today. My question actually kind of nicely piggybacks off of that, which is in both my generation and Gen Z, there is this movement towards not drinking or drinking less or having designated months of not drinking. And there's been a lot of movement for mocktail bars. Beers have gone non-alcoholic, but there are no good alternatives for wine that are alcoholic free. And so I'm wondering if you have any comments on that and if you see a marketable opening there that would continue to feed not only new people to wine, but also the generation that is drinking wine that wants to participate in those activities.
Yeah, what I object to a little bit, let me repeat the question. This lady said, for her generation and for generations around hers, there aren't an enormous amount of wine, good non-alcoholic wine alternatives. There in fact are good non-alcoholic beers in particular, I think, and there are mocktails, as you mentioned. The number of people I know, just me, who know people who are at work solving the issue of a non-alcoholic wine that is really good is a large number. A lot of people are like, ooh, we want to be the one to nail this, to make a really good non-alcoholic wine. I guess what I worry about, I'm happy, by the way, if that's created. Of course, every woman believes that you should have say over your own body. Every woman believes that for sure. And I think a lot of men do too. So if you want to moderate your alcohol consumption, perfect, that's fine. It should be an individual decision. What I somewhat object to right now, and what I'm afraid of in the industry right now, is that the Dry January and Sober October movements have a self-righteous undertone to them. And in particular, what's the opposite of sober? Drunk. So Sober October, if you're drinking wine in October, does that mean that you abuse wine? Of course it does not. But when it's positioned that way, when you're either sober and not drinking, or the opposite, this is a dangerous thing for wine drinkers and for the wine industry. And I think the wine industry somehow needs to think about how it tells the story of wine's role in a healthy society, or at least in a society where wine served to bring people together, which was something good and happy and simple. Everybody in this room knows that You are never not a friend of someone who you share a bottle of wine with, or even a little bit of wine. You become friends over it. That's a good thing, especially in a country, by the way, where loneliness is now considered by psychologists at epidemic levels. And yet, I hear very little from the wine industry talking about wine's beneficial role in society to bring people together. As far as I'm concerned, you know, if 5 years from now, some people at a table are drinking actual wine and some people at the table are drinking non-alcoholic wine, but they're doing it together, having a good time together, that's a wonderful thing. But I will tell you that when I did a video, and I'll make this quick because I know we're a little late, but so in January, I have been getting myself into trouble a lot lately. And in January, I did a video, the first line of which was, I hate dry January. And let me tell you why. It's a 2-minute video. So, and it was about this. It was like, first of all, hey guys, there's this self-righteous attitude, drop it. And number two, what about wine's beneficial role historically, culturally? The first response on Instagram says, Karen, you've got this completely wrong, and I think you need to re-examine your relationship to alcohol. I said, thank you. I think I'm okay, but thanks for the concern. Guess who this is from? The sommelier at the French Laundry, who says, actually one of them, because there are several of them, who says, he says, I'm doing dry January, and many of my staff are doing dry January. I subsequently learned that there is a whole group in the United States called sober somms who do not drink wine. These are sommeliers on the floor of some of the best restaurants in the United States. Anyway, this engendered lots and lots and lots of, I don't know, like thousands of comments going back and forth. Some people saying, you know, I think it's valuable to you know, decide to moderate your consumption. And again, I believe in that. I'm a woman. I believe you get to have a say over your body. But I don't think that you have the right to make every wine drinker around you feel bad about their having their glass of wine, or to suggest that they are doing something just marginally above evil. This is to erase what we know has been the goodness of wine for hundreds and hundreds, in fact, thousands of years. So with that, we should all go have a glass of wine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate you provoking so much thought and discussion about this topic. It's really fascinating to think about that really important relationship between wine writing and how we drink wine, how we think about wine, and where the wine industry is heading. I just had a couple thoughts really quickly on, you know, when you're talking about writing, I was like, you know what, I've experienced that too. And I get it from my students sometimes, where they start off their scientific writing with just the recipe. They just jump into the methodology without telling you why you should care about this particular scientific question. So to comment on what Ben was saying, the awe and the microbiology, it matters. The narratives matter wherever you're working, and that's really important. And I also want to say, you know, while this seems like some bad news for wine writing, I do want to just thank you for all you've contributed to wine writing. I mean, your book is amazing. It really does have that sense of awe and wonder. It brings the reader in. It does not feel like wine is this thing on a pedestal that only a few people can really understand and reach, but really brings people into all the different ways to think about wine, the different locations, the different people. So I just want to thank you for that. And thank you guys all for coming. We do have a reception afterwards. The next Robert Mondavi Institute event is called Breeding the Best Strawberry. It's going to be on May 17th. There will be strawberries to taste, so hopefully you'll join us then. And thanks again for joining us tonight.
Strawberries?
I think so.
Natural.
Depends on how long we leave them out. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.